Let's begin with a word of prayer. Dear Father in heaven, we are thankful for this morning. We ask, Lord, that you can be with us as we study together. That this time that you've given us to study together is also a blessing, as well as our individual study. We just pray that you can help us in that. And we pray for this movement and the people in it, that you can lead us closer to you and that we can reflect your character. Help us to understand these passages in Ezekiel, both in their original application and also as they apply to us today. Thank you for hearing our prayer. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen. Well, good morning, everyone, and welcome to this study. And this is going to be, and I chose the wrong thing. Just hang on. This one. The study on the joining of the two sticks. And I actually wrote a paper on the two sticks, their separation and joining, where I go through the two 2520s, using this as a starting point. So one of the things that I found is if you went back to the story of Joseph and you and this study was first originally done by a guy named Johannes Koletsky back in 2010, where he had taken the story of Joseph. He had found this structure, the 7 years. So I'm gonna draw this out, but the 7 years of plenty, the 7 years of famine, and he then had shown that this is a version of the two 2520s. And so he shows this, which is quite fascinating, actually, how he did that. One is because I did the same thing as him. So that was quite interesting how people a few years apart, I guess it was about 6 years apart, came to the same conclusions from just looking at the story of Joseph. And he had some details which I didn't have. And of course, I had some details that he didn't have. So it was kind of putting these two things together, like the joining of two sticks, so to speak, to get this understanding that we have. Now, so we're gonna look at that part of it, but we're gonna read through this, and we're gonna see that there's lots of different applications of this joining of the two sticks, of how it is understood in the past and in different periods, and how it's understood in our time, and how that comes together in our time. And this to me was one of the most profound things that I had found. And but I think it's probably one of the least understood parts of our message, this joining of the two sticks. It just has never seemed to catch on, in the sense that people haven't picked it up and started sharing it with others or talking about it. So, and I'm not sure why. So, because to me, it was something that was just so clear, and I've presented it several times, but I've never really had too many people really grasp what it's about. And so hopefully as we go through this, we will be able to understand what it's about. Okay, well, let's start reading, just going over this, and then we will draw some lines. The word of the Lord came again unto me, saying, Moreover, thou son of man, take thee one stick, and write upon it for Judah, and for the children of Israel his companions, and take another stick, and write upon it for Joseph, the stick of Ephraim, and for all the house of Israel his companions, and join them one to another into one stick, and they shall become one in thine hand. And when the children of thy people shall speak unto thee, saying, Wilt thou not show us what thou meanest by these? Say unto them, Thus saith the Lord God, Behold, I will take the stick of Joseph, which is in the hand of Ephraim, and the tribes of Israel, his fellows, and will put them with him, even with the stick of Judah, and make them one stick, and they shall be one in mine hand. And the sticks whereon thou writest shall be in thine hand before their eyes. And say unto them, thus saith the Lord God, behold, I will take the children of Israel from among the heathen, whither they be gone, and will gather them on every side and bring them into their own land. And I will make them one nation in the land upon the mountains of Israel. And one king shall be king to them all. And they shall no more be two nations, and neither shall they be divided into two kingdoms any more at all. And neither shall they defile themselves any more with their idols, nor with their detestable things, nor with any of their transgressions. But I will save them out of all their dwelling places wherein they have sinned, and will cleanse them. So shall they be my people, and I will be their God. And David my servant shall be king over them, and they all shall have one shepherd, and they shall also walk in my judgments, and observe my statutes, and do them. And they shall dwell in the land that I have given unto Jacob my servant, wherein your fathers have dwelt, and they shall dwell therein, even they and their children, and their children's children forever. And my servant David shall be their prince forever. Moreover, I will make a covenant of peace with them. It shall be an everlasting covenant with them. And I will place them and multiply them, and I will set my sanctuary in the midst of them forevermore. My tabernacle also shall be with them. Yea, I will be their God, and they shall be my people. And the heathen shall know that I, the Lord, do sanctify Israel, when my sanctuary shall be in the midst of them forevermore. So, as you can see, this is a very broad-reaching prophecy. Now, we just dealt with a little bit of this last time. So we dealt with the separation of the two sticks. So these, when do we get Judah and Joseph separated?
(977).
Okay, so yeah, we have 977, but that's not really when we first get them separated, right? So Judah and Joseph literally as people are separated when Judah suggests that they sell Joseph to the Ishmaelite traders, right? So I know we always want to go to 977, but that's not really where we need to start. We need to get there, and we're going to see why we get there. So we go back to the story of Joseph's dreams. And this is extremely important to understand the joining of the two sticks. Now, we know that these two sticks represent, how have we represented these two sticks? What are they?
Would we consider them sticks or rods?
Well, we don't consider them rocks.
No, I didn't say rocks. Rods. R-O-D-S.
Oh, rods. Okay. Rods. Well, a rod is a stick. It would be the same thing. Let me just take a look at the word. Yeah, so this would be lots of different things. It doesn't say rod here. So it's a plank, a staff, a stalk, a stick. That's the way it's translated in the King James. Tree, wood, a tree is, yeah, that's actually the word for tree, etz. So, but yeah, obviously in this context, it wouldn't be like a growing living tree. It would be a part of a tree. So piece of wood, a stick. Now, so, but how do we normally represent this? Well, how do we understand these two sticks? What are they?
In the chat there, I had inquired about leaf
It's instead of saying stick, it says leaf in my NEV with the Apocrypha. And then that makes me think of Revelation 5 and possibly Revelation 10. So we have a folding tablet rather than two sticks joined. Do you think that's valid?
No.
No?
I
Okay.
don't know how, yeah, I wouldn't think that that makes sense based on the word, because it is the word tree. I mean, if you were going to just literally translate it as you would Hebrew, you would just take it as the word tree. So to take the leaf as a tree wouldn't really make much sense. Now,
Yeah, it says the leaf of Ephraim and his associates of Israel. And it
Yeah.
says, now bring the two together to form one tablet.
yeah,
But I don't know Hebrew, so.
that doesn't really make sense based on Hebrew. That's probably some type of interpretation of what they think it's talking about. But I mean, it is
Okay.
interesting. It's an interesting,
Yeah, it is.
but I don't think that that's the way that I would take it. Now we have taken these as the two 2520s, right? And part of that goes back to in Second Kings. I always forget which chapter it is. Chapter 21. And that's the one where it's talking about Manasseh. And here the word that's used instead of stick is a line, right? I will stretch over Jerusalem the line of Samaria and the plummet in the house of Ahab, and will wipe Jerusalem as a man wipeth a dish, wiping it and turning it upside down. So this is where we've taken it, is that these two 2520s, the line of Samaria, the 2520 for Samaria, is being stretched over Jerusalem. So, and the reason we do that is, well, a number of different reasons, but one of the things is it fits. So when we look at what this is talking about, we know that Ephraim is Samaria, right? So that's northern Israel. And Judah, which is, and here they put Joseph with Ephraim. So there's that brings us back to the story of Joseph. But the basic thing here is it's Judah and Ephraim. And so those are the common names for the northern and the southern kingdoms. And the fact that they exist there in 2 Kings 21 as these lines, which are the two 2520s, when we go to the joining of the two sticks, we relate it to those two lines. Now, here I will go to the whiteboard here. So of course we're all familiar with the two 2520s. This pen is not going to work. Right, so we have these two 2520s, and we know we have the line of Jerusalem or Judah, right? And this is Ephraim. So this is 2520, and this is 2520. And so it's just a very simple idea that what had happened to Samaria is going to happen to Judah. And so we know that we go back to 723 and 1798, 538. And these are the two 1260s, the one from Daniel 12 verse 7, the other one from Daniel 7 verse 25. They're times and a half, 1260. And then this one here that begins in 677, it has these 220 years attached to it. Right, so we know that we have this history. And of course, we can go back to the prophecy in Isaiah 7, and then we can create a prophetic mirror using that. But the joining of the two sticks here has to do with the fact that when you look at Leviticus 26 and you see the prophecy of the 2-7 or the 4-7 times, Leviticus 26 doesn't address these two different nations. They weren't separated at that time because they had just come out of Egypt. And it's quite profound, though, that Isaiah can then take this prophecy of Leviticus 26 after they had gone. And when does Isaiah do it? What is the context here in 742 BC when you got Isaiah 7? Right. So this is
civil war.
It's
between
a
the
civil,
north and the south.
right. So you have this civil war, and of course, is it the first civil war that has happened? It's not the first civil war, is it?
No, they've been fighting basically since they separated.
Right. So 977 BC is also a civil war. Right. So in Isaiah 7, when he's applying these two 25-20s, the start of them, he's going to use the 65-year prophecy, and he's going to say that there's going to be this sign given to the house of David, right? Because he's talking to the king of Judah, which is Ahaz. And he says that when the land that thou abhorrest is forsaken of both her kings. And so we know that northern Israel is going to be forsaken of its king in 723 BC. And then we're going to have in 677 BC that Judah is going to be separated up from its king, right? So the land's going to be forsaken of its king. And so these periods of time here, this 19 years and this 46 years, that end up being the 65 years of the prophecy of Isaiah 7, we know that they're matched at the end. So just 1863, 19 years here, 1844, 1798. So you got these 65 years at the beginning and the end. And this period of time here is a period of 42, so that's it's 235 years. Does anybody know the significance of 235?
Well, 19 years is 235 months.
Right. So this period here is 235 years, and this period here is 235 months. Right. So there is a relationship, a proportional relationship between this period, from this civil war to this civil war, to this period of time here, this 19 years. So I think it's quite profound, because we can take years and months and days, and they have this structural fractalization, right? So a fractal is just something that when you zoom in on a smaller scale, it has the same characteristics. And of course, we know that there's this civil war over here. And one of the things that we discovered back in 2018 was this revolution, because this would be like a revolution and this is like a civil war, if you wanted to compare it. We could actually go into American history and we could look at a revolution that occurs here prior to 1798, and then a civil war that occurs. And so there's a relationship here and here. But also, where is another civil war in American history? Because this is a civil war here, and we have a revolution back here. Is there another civil war?
Well, in the future,
Well, I would say presently. We are in a civil war right now in the United States. There is a civil war going on. And it's been going on for a while. Now, it's not a hot civil war as such, but there has been a lot of articles written by people who understand civil wars. And they say America is in a civil war. There is those steps that will lead to, unless something happens, will lead to a full out, what we would call a civil war. Now, the American Civil War is kind of not really the model for what's happening now, because it's not a typical civil war. What happened in 1860, that war that happened in the States, was actually a little bit more organized as a civil war. That is, some of the states seceded from the Union, and this was to bring them back in. But civil wars often don't happen in that way, and there often can be different groups. There isn't just one, two groups against each other, one side against the other. You often have all kinds of groups vying for power in a civil war. So there's a type of civil breakdown that happens within a society, and this leads to civil war. And so usually there's the government exists in some form, and then other groups trying to take advantage of what's happened to the government. It's been weakened in some way. So civil wars can be very complex situations. And we sort of see that in the United States. It's not a very simple situation. It's a very complex situation. Now, when we look at something like this, we can see that we can look back at the past, and we can see that there are things that happened in the past that are going to happen in the future, and they're repeated. And so we can take this history and we can look at the history of the revolutions in the Civil War, and we can see that what's happening presently in our time relates back to that. And we could also look at it structurally. That is, there are periods of years and time and so forth that bring us to Donald Trump and to his presidency as connected back here to Jeroboam. So Donald Trump is the king of the northern kingdom of Samaria or Ephraim. It's Protestantism. And Jeroboam back here in 977, as part of his rebellion, there was this setting up of this counterfeit feast day on the 15th day of the 8th month, which is a symbol of the midnight cry. And we have connected it to the Thanksgivings of the American Republic. So the Thanksgiving, even though there's not anything technically wrong with it, it still is a counterfeit of God's feast days. And so that has been set up as a symbol in our time to connect us back to here. So I'm not saying Thanksgiving's bad, but I'm just saying that it's connected symbolically back to here. And now when we deal with the joining of the two sticks, as we're going to see, we have placed it in a very specific spot in our history. But if we're going to look at it in Millerite history, where does the joining of the two sticks happen, or does it happen in Millerite history? Because we know here that there's a separation of the two sticks, and then here there's going to be a civil war, and this is again a type of separation of the two sticks. Even though they've already been separated, they become even more separated, to the point that the northern kingdom is going to be taken out of the way, right? So it's going to be scattered, because if we look at this prophecy, it's going to deal with this scattering, and that God's going to gather them. So does a joining of the two sticks happen in 1798 to 1844?
Yes.
Yeah, so it does. Now it happens in a prophecy that is the 2520, and the Millerites would have just understood, for the most part, the 1260 ending in 1798 and the 2520 ending in 1844. And what was happening here is Protestants, and here you could talk about this being Ephraim. This is the test for Ephraim, and this is the test for Judah. And Ephraim and Judah are supposed to come together in this history, but what ends up happening is that they end up being separated still. So they come together under this three-step testing prophetic message. But what ends up coming out of that is Judah is again restored. The Sabbath and the sanctuary is restored. So God now again has a denominated people. And then, but Protestantism is still, even though they fail the test here in 1844 on April 19th, right? They failed that test. They're actually coming to a further test that happens in 1863. So I kind of liken this a little bit to 34 AD and 70 AD. Now, I don't know if people can understand what I'm saying here, but if we look at the close of probation that happened with the 70 weeks in 34 AD, God's execution of that judgment doesn't happen until 36 years later. And we can see that, in a sense, that's what happens here. Protestantism had this opportunity, but they rejected it. And so when they get to 1863 or to 1860, this civil war occurs. And even though there are some things that happen that we would look at as good, they got rid of slavery and things like that. But something was set up in the 1860s that is leading to the situation today. And what is that? What happened in the 1860s in that Civil War that is leading to the situation we see in the United States today with Donald Trump? Does anybody know what that is?
There was a reform movement that wanted to exalt the God that they figured they should worship and put his name on coins and in the Pledge of Allegiance, I guess, or whatever they had in those days.
Okay.
So they were crying for a son-in-law.
Okay. Yeah, I know. In God we trust, all those types of things. So there was definitely a movement by Protestants in the United States because of the move against slavery, because it was the Democrats and the Catholics who supported slavery. There was definitely an expansion, let's say, of anti-Catholicism, while at the same time they were adopting the principles of Catholicism. So they were, in a sense, setting themselves up to be like the Catholics, the ones that they hated. But that's not really the main issue there. To me, it's the exaltation of the presidency that changes in this Civil War. That is, Abraham Lincoln has changed the relationship or the power of the presidency to all the previous presidents. The president was really very weak prior to this Civil War in the 1860s. I don't know. Is there any Americans who can sort of agree with me on that there was a change that happened with Abraham Lincoln? This is brought out by A.T. Jones, by the way, but I probably could have had some of those quotes. But A.T. Jones sees this. Now, it is related to the religious power partly, but it's really the strengthening of the civil authority, of the power of the presidency. It actually unbalances the republic. And they of course, make an amendment to the Constitution that abolishes slavery. But we can see that this Civil War, that what happens in 1863, what happens in the 1860s, leads to the condition that we have now. So what we have now is an extremely powerful president. And this had been increasing all through this history because when crises arose, the presidents became more and more powerful. And one of the things we saw happening in recent decades is these executive orders. And I can't remember I know there's some executive orders that were done by Abraham Lincoln. This is sort of when this started, this idea that the president could just make these executive orders. And so I'm not sure on the history of executive orders. I know I read up on it. I can't remember all the details. But one of the things that we see is these presidents now can just write executive orders. And really that shouldn't be the case. Based on the Republic, you should have, where should the laws come from in the United States?
From the Congress.
They come from the Congress, right? And the president can have veto powers, but really the laws come from the Congress, they go through the Senate, and then the president is really just supposed to be a figurehead.
Well, the president can propose a law.
Yeah, he can propose them, but they still have to go through the Congress.
They have to be enacted through the Congress, and whether or not they are in line with the Constitution,
Right.
then becomes the declarative power of the Supreme Court.
Right. So there's a whole process. This division of powers that occurs in the United States has become unbalanced. Now, the Constitution couldn't really function if the people themselves are in rebellion to it. And so, and the way that has happened is that with the government becoming more and more powerful, it's become more powerful because people wanted it to become more powerful because they benefited from it, or at least certain groups benefited from it. And so you've seen basically what Benjamin Franklin said would happen has happened, though it's taken a lot longer than he thought it might. But once you get this powerful presidency, you have a major problem. Now, of course, there still is the balance of power in the United States, but there is another. Does anybody know what the fifth estate is? I don't know if Americans are familiar with that term.
Well, the supposed fourth estate is supposed to be the press.
And what's the fifth estate?
That's a good question.
Okay. So I'm going to have to look this up. But anyway, the point is, in America, the media has got to this point where it really is in power. And there's been this clash between the media and the president. So in the United States, if Trump loses this election and you end up with, and they lose the Senate, you have, the only thing that you have right now that is upholding the Constitution would be the Supreme Court. But if the Senate is lost to the Democrats, what's going to happen to the Supreme Court?
And then the Supreme Court becomes some would say, conservative conscience.
Okay, but the Democrats, if they have control of the Senate, what can they do to the Supreme Court?
They're talking about expanding the court.
Right.
Right, so they can stack it with
Stacking.
witnesses,
Yeah,
right?
stack, right.
So they would have control of the Congress, the Senate, the presidency, the Supreme Court, and the media itself.
Okay.
So they would have the power to control and dominate, unlike anything that they've ever had in the past.
Okay, but when we take a look at this historically,
Yeah.
the Supreme Court started with 6 members.
Mm-hmm.
And the last time that there was more than 9 members on the court occurred when?
I don't know.
The American Civil War.
Oh, during the Civil War. Okay.
Yeah. Abraham Lincoln was able to appoint a total of 10 justices to the Supreme Court, but it was after his death and after the term of Andrew Johnson that they just allowed the court to go back to 9 members.
Oh, okay.
Now, the main reason that court packing had been an idea and
Yeah,
was being proposed was that Franklin Delano Roosevelt, a very liberal president,
yeah,
wanted to pack the Supreme Court because he was upset because so many Republicans that were on the court were opposing his New Deal policies.
right. And I do remember that part about him wanting to stack the Supreme Court, but he wasn't able to do so.
Well, the situation that occurred is that he wanted to move much faster, but by waiting from the attrition that occurred, he was able to get members on the court in the manner that he wanted. And so from about 1937 until 1940, he was able to put enough people onto the court to re-engineer socially what he wanted to see done.
Yeah, and that's just because Supreme Court justices were dying, and he just replaced them.
Right. Now,
Yeah.
the other thing that many on the more liberal wing in the country have been pushing is, instead of having a lifetime appointment to the Supreme Court, they're looking to limit the number of years that a justice can serve.
Mm-hmm.
And that's not really a good idea either.
Yeah, I don't know. I'm not an expert on this type of stuff. All I know is that what you have in America right now is Trump is upholding the Constitution, and the Supreme Court would be upholding the Constitution. But if you have Trump removed, there's nothing that's going to uphold that Constitution, because the liberals, the Democrats, are not interested in upholding the Constitution. And the radical left is opposed to things like free speech. So, and the censorship that's existing with the media right now, which should be illegal, but isn't, is something that's, people are going to be very controlled. And we see it with this pandemic, especially in Canada, people who just watch the media. I mean, all they talk about is COVID. If you listen to the news, it's all about COVID all the time. And it's all misinformation or distorted information, distorted by the lens of the media, which is something the media really can't not do. It always has to distort in the way that it presents things. So people are living in fear about something that they shouldn't be really fearful about. I mean, certain people are at risk, but most people aren't. So, but anyway, the point is that the media is controlled. Now, I put all this out here because we know that we understood this part, and we can see that the joining of the two sticks that happened here is connected with our history. And one of the things that we know is that the Protestant horn fell in this history of the two-horn power, the United States, and the Republican horn falls in our history. And the way that we have looked at that Republican horn falling would be the Sunday law. Correct? That's how we would look at it. At the Sunday law, that horn falls. But actually, more specifically, it's at the image of the beast test that horn falls, and that the joining of the two sticks occurs. So we're gonna look at that. I know it's sort of looking ahead a bit from where we are right now in studying this. But I want us to keep these things in mind as we look through them. So. Okay. Now, so let's go back. Let's look at these passages a bit at a time. It's probably going to take us 2 studies to get through this joining of the two sticks. Now, one of the things that it brings us to in the references in the treasury of scriptural knowledge It brings us back, and I think this is the question why Dwight asked us if these were rods, because it brings us to number 17. Speak unto the children of Israel, and take of every one of them a rod according to the houses of their fathers, of all their princes according to the houses of their fathers, 12 rods, and write thou every man's name upon his rod. And thou shalt write Aaron's name upon the rod of Levi for one rod, and shall for the head of the rod shall be for the head of the house of their fathers. And thou shalt lay them up in the tabernacle of the congregation before the testimony, where I'll meet with you. Right. And so this is where these rods are taken. And then we know Aaron's rods buds and blossoms, right, and bears fruit and all those things. So, but this example, I think that this is definitely a reference to these two sticks, even though it doesn't have the word rod, it has the word etz, which means tree. It would still be the same thing. And the word that's being used here for rod is, oops. Didn't go where I wanted to. Let's go back.
Yeah, the actual point, Theodore, was that
Yeah.
I had been considering when I'm reading this on the sticks, Isaiah 10:5 had come to mind.
Okay. Yeah. And yeah. So let's go there. So yeah. So the word there is matah. It just means a branch.
Right.
So and obviously that's what you're going to say. And Isaiah 10. I will send against him a hypocritical nation, and against the people of my wrath. I will give him charge to take the spoil, and to take the prey and tread down and take the mire. Is that the verse?
No, Isaiah 10:5.
10:5? Oh,
yeah.
The one before. O Assyrian, the rod of mine anger, and the staff in their hand is mine indignation. Now, yeah, now this is a different word for rod.
Right.
This would be scepter. And then the staff is the same one that would have been used in number 17, the matah,
So
right, which is a branch.
when I was questioning this,
Yeah.
I also opened my Cruden's Concordance because I wanted to get an idea as to what William Miller would have seen.
Yeah. Okay.
And when I'm looking at this under the stick, the verses that were brought up for stick or its plural were varied. I mean, I'm kind of surprised as to the examples that they were using. Because one of them is 2 Kings 6:6, which is during the time of Elisha.
Well, that's the one where he cuts a branch and he puts it into the water so that the axe head will float.
Yeah. So the question is, I mean, here is iron, a symbol of judgment, floating up from the people, the rivers.
Yeah.
So my mind went to those kind of figurative lessons, but then they also used Lamentations 4:8 before they went to Ezekiel 37.
So that's their visage is blacker than a coal. They are not known in the streets. Their skin cleaveth to their bones. It is withered. It is become like a stick.
So if the skin of the people has become like a stick, I mean, it's already given us the idea that this is withered.
Yeah.
But I mean, it's how does skin become a stick, and what's this trying to represent? So it left me with a lot more questions than I was able to find with answers.
Yeah, well, maybe some of those are sort of misdirections. I mean, I would think the primary way we would look at this is the writing of a name upon a stick. So number 17, I think, is, if we're going to say that the law of first mention regarding a stick with writing on it, that would have to be going back to number 17.
Right. And
yeah.
part of what you said last week helped make more sense to me, because I'd always looked at this on the joining of the two sticks as being joined at the ends.
Yeah,
When you were making this comment about the joining of the two sticks, basically putting them in parallel together,
mhm,
it helped me to understand that this is more, instead of having two separate sticks with an area of weakness where they're joined together,
yeah.
you're basically putting them parallel and making them stronger.
Now, another one, so we know that this word branch is part, it's one of the words that's translated, and it's that same word. Well, this is actually a sprout, so it's kind of related, but a branch of bud. And this is Zechariah chapter 3, verse 8. Hear now, Joshua the high priest, thou and thy fellows that sit before thee, for they are men wondered at. Behold, I will bring forth my servant, the branch. And now the reason why I bring this up when we go, so who is this servant, the branch?
Christ.
Okay, it's Christ. And who is Christ?
Beyond the Son of God. I mean, I'm not understanding your comment.
Well, he's the son of David, right?
Okay.
And
He's of the root of Jesse.
right, he's of the root of Jesse. So I'm trying to think of where the verse is here. So Isaiah 22:22, and the key of the house of David will I lay upon his shoulder, so that he shall open and none shall shut, and none shall open. And
That's kind of interesting symbolism.
yeah.
No, I mean the number of the verse.
Oh, 22:22, yeah. And I will fasten him as a nail in a sure place, and he shall be for a glorious throne to his father's house. And there's a whole bunch to this prophecy. I don't want to get into this one, but this is referenced in Revelation as well, dealing with here, if you go here, the key of the house of David, Revelation 3, the message to the Philadelphia church, right? And the angel of the church in Philadelphia, right? These things saith he that is holy, he that is true, he that hath the key of David, that openeth and no man shutteth, and shutteth and no man openeth. So, and the Philadelphia church, when is the time of Philadelphia?
During the time of the Millerites.
Right. So that's the Millerite history, and more specifically, the period from 1840 to 1844. Some people even extend it, of course, past 1844, because Laodicea becomes 1850, 1851. But definitely, as far as Millerites are concerned, it's that period of time which this open and shut door occurs, right? Dealing with the sanctuary. And so this is tying a lot of different threads together. We have these sticks. Now we're going to see as we go through the rest of this here, it's going to deal with the sanctuary, that God's sanctuary is going to be in the midst of them. And we're going to see how the rest of Ezekiel, especially when you get to chapter 40, because this is dealing with this restoration that's happening, and the significance of the sanctuary in the symbolism of it, that we're going to see in Ezekiel, which shows that it's not a literal sanctuary, that it's referring to something that's way in the future. It's very similar when we deal with like the city that comes in Revelation down from heaven. Though I think some people take it literally that it happens in that way. I would think that it's not literally true that it looks like that it's that size. There's symbolism in the size itself. Would it be physically possible to have a city that large, that's that tall? But anyway, that's beside the point. I think that there's a lot of symbolism that we have to understand regarding what's happening in Ezekiel and in Revelation, because it's written in symbols. So we go back to the story anyway, back to number 17. So we have these sticks. Now, what's the significance of a stick with a name on it? Why do you think this image is being used here in Ezekiel 37? Why are we having these two sticks in the first place?
Well, they're representing nations, but are they also not representing the what can come from them, such as a fruitful branch?
Yeah, okay. So when you deal with number 17, those are branches and they can sprout, right? And so Aaron's rod that budded symbolizes God choosing him, right? So if we have these two sticks of Ephraim and Judah, and we know that they represent a separation that has occurred and that they now have to be joined together. What is their joining together symbolizing? Right? Because in verse 17, and join them one to another into one stick, and you sort of hinted at it earlier, that they shall become one in thine hand.
Okay.
So what is the significance of joining two sticks?
To make them stronger.
Right. It makes them, it makes them stronger, right? And so we can see that this is about a unity of two groups that had been separated from each other. And separated from each other, they are weaker. You join them together and they're going to be stronger. Because these sticks have a task to accomplish, right? They have a purpose. And when the kingdom was divided in 977, that definitely weakened the purpose that God had given for Israel. We have to recognize that. I mean, that's definitely true.
Right.
And we can see a similar thing happening to the United States in Millerite history, because they could have been joined together. That is, Republicanism and Protestantism are church and state, right? In a sort of a simplified way. And the United States, though, had these two horns, these two powers. And what was the strength of that if they had used it correctly? Because the United States is not it's a republic. It was not to be a theocracy.
It was also not to be a democracy.
Yeah, it was not to be a democracy. Well, nothing wrong with elections, but that wasn't the purpose of a republic. It wasn't really about democracy. It was about a republic. So that means, because in a democracy, the people rule. In a republic, the Constitution rules. And that Constitution is based upon God's law, right? It's based upon the principles of God's law. And in a republic, each of the individuals are responsible for themselves to obey the Constitution, right? They don't obey the government, right? So a republic is a very powerful thing. So you have these two horns, though. You have republicanism on the one hand. What would be the purpose of the Protestant horn? So the Republican horn deals with the Constitution and the type of government that God wanted the United States to have for a purpose, to serve its purpose. So what was the Protestant horn supposed to be?
For religious liberty.
Okay, well, so the religious liberty is that separation of church and state. So you can see that the two horns are separated in the United States, that they're not joined together. Even though they're on the same beast, they're two separate things. Now, what was Protestantism supposed to be? What was the role of Protestantism in the United States?
Literally to oppose Catholicism.
Okay, to oppose Catholicism, right? That's what Protestantism is about. It opposes Catholicism. And what is Catholicism?
It's the church in charge of everything.
Yeah, the church is in charge of the state. So the church controls the state. In Protestantism, the individual is controlled by God, not the state. Right? So Protestantism is about the individuality of religion, the individual responsibility, as is republicanism. Both of those revolve around the responsibility of the individual, both in his civil responsibility and in his religious responsibility. And so what happened in the Millerite movement to Protestantism, because that's when the Protestant horn fell, and what actually happened there in the context of what we just talked about?
They began to give way to the tenets of Catholicism.
Right, and in the context of what we talked about, what is that tenet?
Control by the state that then is handed over to the church.
Right, yeah, so both the church control over the individual, right?
Right.
So when the church is controlling the individual, when the church decides we're going to disfellowship you, instead of actually addressing whatever it is you're presenting, we're going to now use civil authority, and we're going to use the power of the state as well, because as the church loses the power of the gospel, it seeks the power of the state. And so when Protestantism fell, its spirit that was manifested against God's people is going to be magnified when republicanism falls. Now, this is relating to so many different things that are happening right now. And in trying to sort through this, I think in some ways we've been a little misguided, or we've had some ideas that I don't think are correct. And when we look at the Republican horn falling, how have we understood that? Again, I asked this question earlier. How did we understand it? When does the Republican horn fall?
Sunday law.
The Sunday law. So we would just say the Sunday law. But what does Jeff say when the Republican horn falls, if you've seen his study on the two horns?
Isn't it before the Sunday law?
Before the Sunday law. And he calls it the image of the beast test. That is, he applies when the image of the beast is formed, it's formed before the Sunday law. I mean,
right.
Obviously very connected, because the Sunday law is going to follow. But many Adventists are going to fail the image of the beast test. And why do they fail the image of the beast test?
Because they've already submitted more to the civil authority, and they're not recognizing the claims of God's law upon their lives.
Okay, so obviously they already have, they're working and operating on false principles. Though the answer that I wanted was the fact that there's no Sunday law attached with the image of the beast makes them, and that it's attached with things that they support, that they would support then the image of the beast. Because all they could look at is, we're just concerned about a Sunday law. And since there's no Sunday law attached with the image of the beast initially, they will submit to that image of the beast. And of course, you're correct, that all these principles that have that symbolized that are symbolized by this beast power, let's put it that way, they've already submitted to. And we can see this in how the church has treated those who don't agree with it. So they don't actually follow the principles set down in God's word and the counsel given in the spirit of prophecy to deal with things like new light, or how to deal with people who are in error, right? So we've seen the church manifest this spirit, over the last 20 years, let's say, and how it's been dealing with people who are at odds with the church, even when obviously there are people who are in error, but even when they're dealing with people who are in actual error, they're not dealing with it properly. That is, what they're doing is destructive. It actually drives more people into error. It never corrects the error at all, because they just get rid of the people. And of course, that's created the situation we have in Adventism today, where basically we have all kinds of false doctrines being taught, and ones that really had been dealt with in the past and should have been addressed. And there's no reason for them to rise up again in Adventism, but they do. And the reason is not intellectual, but the reason is because of the spirit of the church, because of how the church tries to deal with error. Because how do you deal with error?
You meet it.
And you meet it with what?
Kindness.
Kindness and truth. You meet it in the spirit of Christ. There's a way to correct people who are in error. And it takes patience. It takes time. It takes love. And you can't correct everyone. But when you do it, when you deal with error correctly, one of the things that happens is, even though you may not save the individuals who are caught up in the error, that error does not spread in the same way as it does when you just try to uproot it through human force. So when you try to remove error in the way that man tries to remove error, you actually create a bigger problem. It ends up magnifying it. And so when things are done properly, you will save some. Some who are in error can be redeemed, because I've seen it happen. I've been a part of that and seen people come out of all kinds of errors because of how they're treated, and also because truth is being presented to them. They're being offered something better than what they have. But you can't always save everyone. Some people cling to their error. But the main thing is, it's the people around them are not affected as they would be if you just got rid of that person. If you just dealt with that person harshly, you would actually have more problems. And that's how the church has always dealt with it, or has for a long time. I remember back in the 1970s, not that I was a part of the church then, but I've read, they had set up, and I think this is in the time of, can't think of his name, Robert, is it Robert? No, I can't think of his name.
You're not thinking of Wheeland, are you?
No. He was actually the conference president, the one before
Falkenberg.
No, before Neil Wilson. I can't think of his name.
Yeah.
Was it Pearson?
Yeah, Robert Pearson. So Pearson, in his time, they had actually set up a committee to deal with new light, and they laid out the principles of how to address new light, and it's very profound. So one is, they first wanted it to occur on a local level within the church. That is, the local church, when somebody had something that was considered new light, that the local church, the pastor first would study with the person, and then the board, would be brought in, and they would look at what was happening, and if they saw any kind of light in it, they were then to bring that up to the local conference level, and the local conference would then look at it. And there was this whole process of evaluating light, with the idea that new light can come to the church through the meanest of people, the littlest of people, right?
The least, yeah.
Yeah, the least. It's not just going to come from the leadership. Now, when the 2520 issues came around, people would often say, well, you need to submit it to the BRI, and they're going to address it. But that wasn't the initial counsel that was given in the 70s regarding how to address new light. That would actually happen really gradually, going through from local levels all the way up. And the BRI wasn't actually even a part of that. Now, the idea of just setting up the BRI, one is the BRI doesn't care, and they're not going to look at anything that's that you send them. I've talked to somebody from the BRI, and they say, that's not how it works. So when people say, well, you need to submit your information to the BRI would say, no, you don't. But the thing is that council, or that those policies that they tried to create in the 70s were never adopted. The church never adopted them. So they create this policy paper of how to deal with new light, but it was never adopted by the church. And if it had been adopted by the church in the 70s, we probably would have not had the situation that arose in the 80s, right? Because there would have been a way for the church to address a lot of the errors that came in, like with Ford and so forth. But instead, everything started to happen from a top down. And even with the way they dealt with Ford wasn't really the correct way to do it. It created more problems, and it created basically a rebellion. We lost a lot of ministers and a lot of church members over how Ford was dealt with. Because even though he was teaching error, there's a proper way to do it. Now, I bring this all up, this discussion here, because when we look at what happened in Millerite history, the Protestants, how they dealt with the Millerites, who they believed were in error, talking about the second coming of Christ, is really what made them Babylon, right? The Protestants became part of Babylon because they are now manifesting the spirit of the papacy. Now, when we get to the end of time here, and we're going to have the joining of the two sticks, as you're going to see, or basically when the Republican horn falls, is at the period that we would call the image of the beast test, and it's also the point at which the two sticks are joined together. That is, those Protestants who have studied and come to understand the spirit of the papacy, they have come to understand and experience real Christianity, they're going to join with us, partly because they see what's happening in the world. So they're going to see how the world is addressing the problems of those that aren't conforming to what the state and the church want. But also they're going to see another group of people who are operating on Protestant principles, real Protestants, not just people who are protesting, but people who actually reflect Christ's character. So they're going to join with God's people before the Sunday law, right? So this is where Jeff had placed the joining of the two sticks. And I remember specifically writing him, asking him in 2015, when are the two sticks joined? And he said at the image of the beast test, which didn't mean anything to me at the time. I had to study to find out what he was talking about, because he clearly places the image of the beast test before the Sunday law. And actually, I think I asked him the question the other way around. I think I asked him, when was the image of the beast test? And he said at the joining of the two sticks. So and I'd never really studied into the joining of the two sticks. So then I started looking at that. Yeah, so Pearson's bottom up dealing with new light, Angela's talking about, is how it's supposed to be done. And I don't know if Pearson was the one who initiated all that, but it was under his presidency in the early 70s that they were creating these policies. But the belief that new light would come, I think, is pretty amazing, that that idea still existed within Adventism, that it could come from the least of church members, that it didn't come from the scholars. Where now, you wouldn't even consider somebody who's uneducated to possibly be a source of light. It has to be the educated class.
Well,
Okay, yeah.
but if you take a look at biblical history, the ones that understood that the soon arrival of Christ were the shepherds and those that were willing to study with an open mind.
Yeah, it's always been that way.
Right.
And so it doesn't make sense to think that it's going to be a different way.
Right.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Okay, so let's look at verse 18. So verse 18 is very interesting, because it says, "And when the children of thy people shall speak unto thee, saying, Wilt thou not show us what thou meanest by these?" So are the children of the people going to ask us to show us what we mean? Because if we're Ezekiel, is he saying here that the children of thy people will speak unto us and ask us what we mean by these things, right? That's what it's saying. And now you can go to other places in Ezekiel, because one of the things that this talks about in Ezekiel is you have this, it references us to all this rebellious house. So we have Ezekiel 12:9, "Son of man, hath not the house of Israel, the rebellious house, said unto thee, What doest thou?" So there's a question. "Say now to the rebellious house, Know ye not what these things mean? Tell them, Behold, the king of Babylon is come to Jerusalem." So when they ask, what do you mean by these things? It's often a rebellious house, right? That's being referred to. Ezekiel 24:19. Also says, "And these people said unto me, Wilt thou not tell us what these things are to us that thou doest?" Right? So we can see that this movement is a sign. And even though there may be a rebellious house, people want to know what's happening. And to know what's happening, who do they have to ask?
Those that have chosen to study.
Right. So those that understand the things in God's word, and people are going to be put into a situation where they want to know what's happening. Even if they've been a rebellious house, even if they haven't been following God, they want to know. Now, of course, there's many who are following God and also wanting to know. But the point is, this is the church coming to Ezekiel, asking for the meaning of things. Now, so in the context here, it's about these two sticks. So he's going to take these two sticks and he writes on them. And we say that they're what? These two sticks are what? We're saying they're the 2520s.
Okay.
Right? So this 2520 that we have studied and we have understood, people are going to ask us what these things mean. And then we're going to have to give them an answer. And so this is the answer that Ezekiel gives regarding the two sticks. He says, "Thus say unto them, Thus saith the Lord God, Behold, I will take the stick of Joseph." So the stick of Joseph, which is in the hand of Ephraim. So the stick of Joseph is Protestantism. "And the tribes of Israel, his fellows." So this is the Protestant world. Now, and so, obviously this is all the 10 tribes as a symbol, which represents those that are scattered, all those that are not Catholics, that are following God in some way, but obviously are affected by Catholicism and by false worship, right? So we know that that's that group, that's Protestantism. But there's Protestantism's going to be united. It says here, I'll put them with him, even with the stick of Judah. So who is Judah represent in our history?
The people of God.
Yeah, the people of God. Now we would say the Seventh-day Adventist Church, because if you just take them on the bigger symbols, you have the Protestants and you have Seventh-day Adventists. And we could go back to Millerite history and show that they're the Protestants. They failed the test. They became part of Babylon. But a group of those Millerites continued and formed the Seventh-day Adventist Church, which is Judah, right? So it's the southern kingdom. So that's how we've understood it. And in our understanding of the presidents, the 19 and the 20, we have an understanding that the 20 refer to who's the 20th president of Adventism.
Wilson.
So Ted Wilson, and he's retained power because of this pandemic, where he might have been taken out of power this last summer, but he's now still in power. So he's the king of Judah. He's the 20th, or the last king of Judah. And then the 19th king, which is northern Israel, that's going to be representative of the last Republican president, which would be Trump, right? So you have this Republican president and you have this Adventist president. And that Republican president, republicanism is based on Protestantism, right? He's also the leader of the Protestant world in a biblical sense, because he's the president of the United States. And so it says here that, so you got Ephraim and you got Judah, right? So we know that there's these presidents. We have the Seventh-day Adventist Church. Is the Seventh-day Adventist Church passed by in this? So when we say that there's the joining of the two sticks, we know that the Seventh-day Adventist Church is already passed by. So,
Right.
But yet there still is this symbolism of the Adventist Church of Judah, right? So those would be Adventists who are clinging to the truth. These would be the ones that actually inherit the principles of Adventism, not the ones that fall away. So the true Adventists are not the ones who stay with the organizational structure. The true Adventists are the ones who follow the truth, right? The Adventist structure is not going to save you. And the same with this stick of Ephraim. So we know that the true Protestants are the ones who follow the principles of republicanism and Protestantism. So that's going to be the Christians, the Protestants, who join with Judah. And I will make them one stick, and they shall be one in my hand. So we say that you put these two sticks together, they're stronger, for one, but they're now united, and they're united for a task. Because the sticks whereon thou writest shall be in thine hand before their eyes. So who is their eyes in this context of what this question is here?
Those that come to ask.
Right. So those that come to ask are going to see that these two sticks are joined, right? So they're going to understand something about the 2520, what it means as a prophecy in the past and what it means in the present time. So they're going to see now that this prophecy about the joining of the two sticks has occurred. See, we have a message that Adventism needs to hear. And we haven't even understood what that message was. Because if we see what's talked about here, this joining of the two sticks, in the context of how we have applied the joining of the two sticks, is about a message that is a visual test that is going to demonstrate what the truth is. And when does this visual test occur? According to our understanding of the joining of the two sticks.
Just before the Sunday law.
Just before the Sunday law, right? So this is something that, we've partially understood in this message. Now, we know that Raphi and Panium are still future. And we would say that this visual test is connected with Panium, right? Because if you take where Jeff has placed the image of the beast test, he's connecting it to the midnight cry. Now, part of what we believe that was going to happen is July 18th was going to be that visual test, correct?
Right.
Right. So we believe that July 18th was going to be that. And we were disappointed because it wasn't. But there's a reason why it wasn't, and that's because this movement wasn't ready for the task that was going to be given to it. And if we had thought about it and really recognized that the things that we were looking at for that were going to happen couldn't possibly have happened already. And that's because we didn't have Raphia, so we couldn't have Panium. Just like the Millerites, we set aside some of the things that we knew that were supposed to happen before the visual test, and we set them aside because we could see the date was approaching. And the Millerites did the same thing with October 22nd. They ignored the plagues. They ignored a lot of things that was supposed to happen before Jesus came back. Now, of course, where is Samuel Snow's letters? We're in this prediction before midnight. And so we're typifying what's going to happen. But be that as it may, so we know that there's this visual test. And say unto them, thus saith the Lord God, behold, I will take the children of Israel from among the heathen, whither they be gone, and will gather them on every side and bring them into their own land. So where is that land now? And who's scattered? So we know the heathen or the nations, the Goyim, have been scattered. The children of Israel have been scattered among the Goyim, I should say. And God's going to gather them. And so when did this gathering happen? Because it's happened at different times. So was there a gathering in Millerite history?
Yeah.
Yeah. We know that there's a gathering. That's what Millerite history is about. There was this 225-20s, and there was a gathering that happened with Protestantism after 1798, and a gathering that happened with Judah after 1844. So, and they should have been gathered together. That is, if Protestantism had done its work, the Sabbath and the sanctuary, Protestantism and Judaism, or Judah, would have joined together into this Adventism, Seventh-day Adventists. Protestants would have been Seventh-day Adventists. They would have been united as one people. But of course, Protestants failed. So there was this gathering that happened. But there's going to be a gathering again. And this gathering is the nations or the people of the nations that are scattered, God's people that are scattered among the nations, that are Protestants. They're going to be joined with us, with Seventh-day Adventists, with the Levites, right? So it's not, when I say us, I don't mean the priests per se. I mean the Levites. And this is another point that I think was a problem with the new movement, because the new movement took the position that the priests were going to form a new church. But there can't be a new church because the Levites represent that group. And that's why I took the position that if the Levites started to come in, we would be insignificant. That is, we're not the most skilled. God would raise up people that are much more powerful than us, much more skilled, much more godly, much more knowledgeable than us to actually accomplish that work. That we weren't going to be like this new church where people joined us and we were the leaders, which is the idea that Tabo had, right? He was looking forward to being this leader of this church. And of course, that's, wrong-headed in lots of ways, because that's not how you become a leader. You become a leader by being a servant. But also it's wrong-headed in that this totally ignored everything that the Spirit of Prophecy said about God's church, and also what the New Testament says about God's church, that all Israel shall be saved, right? So we know that God has his church, and Christ is the head of that church. So So I'll make them one nation in the land of the mountains of Israel, and one king shall be king to them all. So who's this king that's going to be king to all of them?
Christ.
Christ.
Christ. So this is about Christ being our king, and they shall be no more two nations, neither shall they be divided into two kingdoms anymore at all. And this is a reiteration, the next verse, of things that were said in previous chapters regarding the restoration. Neither shall they defile themselves anymore with their idols, nor with their detestable things, nor with their transgressions. Right. So we had ideas like that in chapter 36 as well. God cleanses them, restores them. There's other verses as well. Whole bunch of different verses dealing with those ideas. We've read them, right? So God is going to get rid of the idols, all of our transgressions, and he'll save them out of all their dwelling places wherein they have sinned, which I think is an interesting way of talking about it, that we've sinned in these dwelling places. Now, it uses the word dwelling places, but it's actually a seat or a situation or a sojourning. So we have sat where? Where have we been seated that has caused us to sin? I don't know if that's a good question.
It's not.
Okay, we've been situated in the world, in false worship, right? So it's not so much about our houses, our dwelling places, because that's not really the way I would translate the word, but it's in this seat of the kingdom of this world, right? So that's why we have sinned. We're in earth, we're not in heaven, and we need to be in heavenly places in Christ Jesus. And this goes back to this idea of the church triumphant. So in 2017, the issue of the church triumphant became this, a lot of people left over it. Some friends of mine left the movement because of what was being taught about the church triumphant. And this was the idea that we are the church triumphant now, where Ellen White says that the church triumphant is in heaven. And I wrote a paper on it. And the way that I defended our position is that we are in heavenly places in Christ Jesus. And that's from Ephesians chapter 2. And that when you deal with the wheat and the tares, there are no tares in the church triumphant. But as long as you have the church militant, what will you always have in the church militant?
Or you'll have tares.
You'll always have wheat and tares, right?
Yeah.
So the idea that was being taught was that we're going to have this church that's not going to have any sinners in it. That was what was being taught. Of course, it was a ridiculous idea. You can't have a church on earth that has no sinners in it. I mean, you could keep trying to remove all the sinners. The problem is you're probably going to still be there. So what we need is we need to be in heavenly places in Christ Jesus. And this is really about overcoming sin. If we're going to be part of the church triumphant in the future, we have to be part of the church triumphant now. We can't just wait until Jesus comes back and then be part of the church triumphant. And so I go through a study and I show Ellen White's statements and biblical statements to show this, that when we're in Christ, we're part of the church triumphant, even if we're on earth, because we're in heavenly places in Christ Jesus. And so when we look at this, if we take chapter 37, remember, this was about the resurrection. So we've taken chapter 37 and we've made an application of it to 9/11 and now to the image of the beast test for the joining of the two sticks. But if we look at chapter 37, where is it actually located in the line of Ezekiel? Where is Ezekiel placing this? It's after,
just before the Sunday law.
no, Ezekiel's not placing it there. We're placing it there. Ezekiel's placing this after the second coming, right? He's placing it way in the future. He's talking about God's kingdom when David, my servant, shall be king over them. So this is talking about after the 1,000 years, or at least connected to the 1,000 years, whether before or after. So it's after the second coming, I guess is my point that he's talking about. But remember, we've taken Ezekiel and we've made an application of it to our history, even though ultimately Ezekiel is talking, just like the book of Revelation, about events that are still in the future. But we've shown that these events are typified by this movement. This movement is going through these events. So this is talking about, the church triumphant. This is talking about in heaven, right? Christ, or David, the son of David, is being our king, right? But we know that we're applying it now. So that means it has to occur now in order for it to occur later. And this is kind of the principle that I have come to understand about types. So how do we normally think of a type? What is a type?
It's an example of something else.
It's an example of something that's, and specifically prophetically, something that's going to happen in the future.
Okay.
So why do you need the type? What is the connection between the type and the antitype? Do we need the type in order to have the antitype?
Yes. If you don't, it's like having the two sticks, basically.
Yeah. So we need this type to have the antitype, because obviously it's typifying what's going to happen. But we can see that if you didn't have the experience that God's people are going through in all of these types, could you ever get to the goal that God is looking for humanity?
No.
No. So God, it's not just that types are representations of what's going to happen in the future. Types are actually a process that leads to what they are prefiguring. So what ends up happening in the experience of the Millerites? It becomes a type of what's going to happen in our movement. But if you never had Millerite history, you couldn't have our movement, right?
Right.
So we need to think of types as much more real than we think of them. That is, when I talk about a date being typical, what do people think I mean by that? Or some people think I mean?
That it's something that is usual, where you're actually meaning that this is a date that is a type or a foreshadowing of what is to come.
Right, so it's a symbol of what's going to come. Now, does that date have significance as merely a symbol?
No.
No, it can't possibly, because for it to be a type, that means somebody has to relate to it in some way, and it has to affect that person in some way. So just to have a date on a calendar and say, well, this date has this symbol and it's a type, isn't enough. What has to happen in a type? You don't need the symbol. What else do you need beside the symbol? I've already kind of said it. You need a person who responds to that symbol, and that symbol affects him in some way and changes him, right? That person, people have to be affected. So when we have this 777, right? And I say, well, nothing's going to happen on December 25th, 2021. We can't expect any event. And people say, well, you can't do that, right? They say you need to have an event on that date, or it's just merely a symbol and nothing else. But of course, that doesn't even make any sense. It's a contradiction of terms, because something can't be merely a symbol and nothing else. That symbol, the reason why that symbol is important is because there's a group of people who are related to that symbol. They have a connection with what that symbol means, and it's part of their experience. Even if no event occurs on December 25th, 2021, it doesn't do away with the symbolic nature of that date as part of this structure of 777 days that is based upon 777 days at the beginning of our message from November 9th to December 25th, 1989 to 91, right? So we know that that 777 days is real, it happened, and that it's typical of something that's happening now. But what's happening now is also a type of something that's going to happen in the future. So when we look at types, when we look at symbols, when we look at the joining of the two sticks, whether it was in the past, in all the different histories, or when we look at it at the present, this is all pointing forward to ultimately an event in the future. And you can't say that the event now is not real. It's not the antitype, but the type is absolutely necessary to get to the antitype. That is, Jesus just can't come back. You can't, for Seventh-day Adventists, we just believe the Sunday law is going to come one day, right? But for many Christians, they believe that one day they'll open up the newspaper and all these people will have disappeared or something. And, Jesus has returned and taken them all away and you're left behind, right? Or some Christians, maybe they don't believe in the secret rapture, but they just think one day Jesus will just come back, just out of nowhere. Just one day, all of a sudden, there's nothing that goes and happens before it, but he just returns. And some people might believe that there are some events that are going to happen, just prior to that. But what they don't realize is that they're involved already in events that are typical of what's happening. That is, we are all, for lack of better terms, we're actors in a play. We're all part of what's happening. That is, all of our lives, all of the decisions that we are making are all part of prophecy. And we don't recognize that. We don't recognize that what's happening around us is a fulfillment of prophecy, and that these are all types of things that are going to happen. And so when somebody would say, because there are people who are arguing that the pandemic is not a type of the Sunday law, right? Correct? There's people arguing that.
Right.
Which is insane. Because it is. It doesn't matter what you think about time setting and all this kind of stuff. You can't deny the fact that the pandemic is a type of the Sunday law. If you say that it's not, then you don't believe anything. Right?
Well,
you understand what I'm saying?
The pandemic is a foreshadowing.
Which is a type.
Correct.
Yeah. So it has the characteristics of the Sunday law. We can all recognize that. And if we try to argue that it doesn't have the characteristics of the Sunday law, then we don't know what the Sunday law is, right? Because everything that's happening with this pandemic is what we will see happening with the Sunday law. The censorship, the control, all these things are a type of the Sunday law. And so to argue that it's not is to argue against types of any kind. You can't say that anything is a type. So maybe you could try to argue, well, it's not in the place, in the line where the Sunday law is, but I don't see how you can have something that's a type of the Sunday law that isn't in some way in the line that is typical of the whole line, right? You can't just have a type of the Sunday law just show up that's not in a reform line. Because every time we have a type of the Sunday law, we're going to see that it's going to fit in a reform line, because that's just how God's works. That's how things work. Things have structures. They don't just exist out of nowhere. You couldn't have a type of the Sunday law without the events preceding it. You just can't happen. So anyway, we've got a little bit over time. It's 9:11 right now. So
Really,
So-
9/11?
yeah. So we're gonna continue this tomorrow morning. We're gonna deal with this last part, and there's some very important things in here. You know, looking at the covenant of peace, dealing with the tabernacle. We're gonna look a little bit more into David, my servant, what that's about. We're also gonna look at Jacob, the significance here of Jacob, why Jacob is being mentioned again. So all these things we'll study tomorrow. So let's close with a word of prayer. Dear Father in heaven, thank you for the time that we had here this morning. I know many people are just listening to the discussion, thinking about it, and those watching it as well. We know, Lord, that there's a lot that we have to learn here. And we know that this joining of the two sticks is an important prophecy, and that we need to understand how it applies to us and in the future as well. So we ask that you can help us in our continued study of your word. And thank you for hearing our prayer. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen.